Hello. This is Courtney Kleftis, the resident founder of the Goddess Foundation, um, a library, archive, and spiritual center, which I hope will eventually become a 501c nonprofit here in the US. Fingers crossed. That'll likely take years and a lot of work on my end to learn more about how to start a nonprofit. Because I do not have any business acumen and I want to make sure this is an anti-capitalist endeavor. So there's a lot of hoops I need to jump through to learn more. So what is the Goddess Foundation? The Goddess Foundation, like I said, is a library, archive, and spiritual center, all currently housed online at this website, www.thegoddessfoundation.org. So I started it last year on September 9th, 2021. I officially launched the website and I haven't had a lot of time or energy to dedicate to it this year because I am currently employed full-time working as the ensemble librarian at St. Olaf College, just south of the Twin Cities in Minnesota. An ensemble librarian is in case you didn't know, if you don't know about music librarianship, which is already quite niche, ensemble librarianship is an even more niche subset thereof. Basically, I handle all the music for bands, choirs, orchestras, etc., and deal with licensing and copyright. Anyway, enough about my day job. That's a little bit more about who I am. So I work full time, and I'm also currently working part time towards my MLIS, Masters of Library and Information Science, through the University of Alabama distance program. I just finished an intensive May course all about digital storytelling, which was a blast, and I am hopeful that I will find ways to incorporate what I learned into the Goddess Foundation programming. I already have some ideas up my sleeve. I mean, I don't have any sleeves at the moment, but yes. So, and then I have one more class and I will be graduating, knock on wood, this coming December 2022. So the good news about that is I will suddenly have much more free time to dedicate towards this love child of mine, so to speak. It's not really the word. Yeah. Anyway, it's Mercury retrograde. And I have a debilitated Mercury in Pisces in the 6th house for any of you astro nerds out there. So forgive me for my inevitable rambling. So again, all of this is a little bit of preamble and context for why the Goddess Foundation, which I started however many months ago, almost a year ago, 9 months, something like that. Can't do math either. Why it is a bit slow moving to get it off its feet. So what I'm going to talk about is more of a long-term vision. Eventually there will be a Patreon and I will have tools and resources where you can make donations, which are much appreciated and will definitely help make this more of a thriving organization. So what is it? It's basically an organization dedicated to reclaiming the voices which have been silenced and suppressed for millennia, basically the past 5,000 years, give or take, of heteropatriarchy. So reclaiming those silenced and suppressed voices here and now from a cross-cultural perspective and across large spans of time. So for now, it's starting on a relatively small scale with this podcast series, which I'm launching right now, which will also be available on the Goddess Foundation YouTube channel in video format and/or Anchor FM in audio format only. A blog series and various other ambitious initiatives, one of which I will get into a little bit further down the line, is my initiative based on the theme of the year, which will likely persist for much longer than 2022-23, dedicated to finding the goddess hidden in plain sight in Judeo-Christianity and Islam as well, just in the Abrahamic religions, sort of writ large. So yes, using the Father's tools to dismantle his house. And I'm bastardizing that quote, which I think is Audre Lorde. Horrible paraphrase, but yes, because I do think it's vital that we do use the master's tools to dismantle his house and find the goddess where she lurks in the corners of these very, very patriarchal institutions. So that'll be a topic of a whole other series, a whole other podcast episode. But that's just to give you a sense of what's coming down the road. Coming in August, most likely, I will have a podcast episode and video all about Sophia, or Chokmah, wisdom, the wisdom goddess, and her various permutations. And I'm actually rereading this massive tome by, I don't know how to say her name. It looks like Caitlin Matthews, but I think it's pronounced quite differently. Sophia, Goddess of Wisdom, Bride of God. This is a classic, seminal text on Sophia. So I will be diving into that and most likely offering a book review, book talk series at some point down the line. So again, back to just the Goddess Foundation writ large and who I am, what gives me the authority to start this. So I am not a scholar of religious studies. I do not have a background in feminist theology. Perhaps in another dimension, a parallel universe, I do. I am approaching this entirely as a layperson, so to speak. And I think that's one of the most appealing parts of the goddess movement, is that she speaks to all people, whether or not they're traditionally vested with authority, and enables them to find their own voice and agency through the practice or process of gnosis, an ancient Greek term, which essentially means deep inner knowledge or wisdom, which again brings me back to Sophia. It's sort of a circular rant. So no, I am not, I have a PhD in musicology through a feminist and queer lens. So I am highly educated, but I am not a goddess scholar per se. So bear that in mind. And I also am, like I said, working towards my degree in librarianship. So what I am very skilled at is curating and lists of resources that are valuable for the study of the goddess and the praxis of the goddess, because I think it's a deeply embodied and visceral experience. It's not entirely cerebral. So just a little bit, this is kind of, this is entirely unscripted. So ultimately the Goddess Foundation is dedicated to reclaiming your sovereignty and agency as a human. You may identify as a woman, you may not. I will have an episode and a blog post probably in a couple months about why I think goddess is incredibly inclusive and beyond the anthropomorphic conception of gender and the gender binary. So I am dedicated to the goddess and the feminine because that side of the binary has been silenced and suppressed, often violently so, for so long. But that said, the Goddess Foundation is inclusive of non-binary and trans individuals. This is a branch of goddess spirituality that is entirely antithetical to Z Budapest's Dianic Wicca, for instance. She is notorious for being openly transphobic. But that's, again, a topic for another episode. So I think of goddess ultimately as consciousness, which is beyond gender, but for the purposes of women's justice specifically, and that includes, it's not necessarily women-born women, anyone who identifies as a woman, cis or otherwise, is entirely welcome and falls under the umbrella of the goddess. So that's sort of the social justice component of the Goddess Foundation. And I will go into a very specific, very deeply personal social justice project that I hope to launch as part of the community side of the Goddess Foundation. Hell, I'm going to come out. So this project is something that I feel is deeply important and is necessary for women and any human with a vulva. I suffer from two interrelated gynecological conditions, one of which is called vestibulodynia, I think, and the other one is called, give me a second, vaginismus. These two conditions are actually really common, but because they afflict predominantly women, no one knows about them. So I aim to throw down that wall, bulldoze through it, if you will. And part of the Goddess Foundation community resource will be a community resource for anyone struggling with these or similar conditions. And in case you're wondering what they are, because again, like I said, I had never even heard of it until I was diagnosed. Vaginismus is a condition wherein the muscles of the uterus contract kind of involuntarily, like muscle spasms, and essentially prevent vaginal penetration. And I have that as a secondary condition, which is linked to and perhaps caused by, and they're just inextricably linked, to vestibulodynia, which is another form of another condition that is related to and falls under the umbrella category of just vaginal pain, vulval pain. I love how I'm using the words vagina and vulva so openly and unashamedly. Goddess supports this endeavor. Anyway, so vulvodynia, from my understanding, my gynecologist has explained it to me, is where the nerve endings in the vaginal opening are overly sensitized. So they send neural signals to your brain anytime they're touched, basically like alert, alert, pain, and fight or flight kicks in. So these two conditions make having a conventional sex life rather difficult. And I am fortunate in that I am a married queer woman married to a fellow woman. So it's a lot easier for us to not have penetrative sex. We don't really have to. And I know that's not necessarily mandatory for heterosexual couples, but I would imagine it's more of a challenge for heterosexual women with these conditions in some ways than it is for me. But regardless, it's something that needs to be spoken about publicly, and we need community and resources for it. And we need to eliminate the stigma and the shame, which is why I'm speaking openly about it. And the Goddess Foundation supports all women and all humans with vulvas who have any form of vulva pain. Vulval pain, I'm not sure if does it work as an adjective? I don't know. Again, I'm going to blame my rambling and struggle with stringing together words on Mercury retrograde. So that was a long rant about one of the social justice projects, community resources that the Goddess Foundation will offer. And it is, again, deeply personal. I will also provide a blog post, most likely in a couple of weeks, with a lot of other resources I've personally found through my own journey of navigating and learning how to live with these conditions, which are so stigmatized and just basically invisible. All right, so that's a little bit more about the Goddess Foundation and what it is. I will also link to this resource. You can access it from the Goddess Foundation website. This is Who is the Goddess? It's my personal take. Again, the Goddess promotes gnosis, deep personal inner wisdom. So take or leave what I have to say about what Goddess means to me and find out what they or she means to you. But I will have a series on this 5-part Who is the Goddess, including which I derive from my pentacle model, inspired by various Wiccan traditions, especially Gardnerian Wicca, which also heavily include the pentacle. So number 1, immanence, the goddess within, the God self or the goddess self, also referred to in various esoteric traditions as the daimon or the divine double. That's a topic of immense interest to me. You can learn more about it in my other on my other website and my other podcast, which is right here, Eudaimonia, Living in Alignment with Your Soul's Purpose. That's temporarily on hiatus, and I will eventually, most likely at some point this summer, relaunch it and have alternating Goddess Foundation podcasts with Eudaimonia podcasts. And eventually they will be coming together under the umbrella of the Goddess Foundation and this concept of immanence. The second 2 are animism and pantheism. The world is alive and ensouled. Sacred matter and mater, Latin for mother, reclaiming the innate divinity of the body and sexuality, which again speaks to reclaiming and shedding light on predominantly women's health conditions, anyone with vaginal pain. And there are other conditions that I didn't talk about, like endometriosis, which is a menstrual disorder. There will also be resources about that and other conditions, all as part of my justice-informed practice of honoring the innate sacredness of the human body, even if it is, quote unquote, damaged. It's still sacred. 4, the spiral dance, invoking Starhawk, modern witch, and her vision and my vision of the universe and life as cyclical and spiralic. We don't move in a straight line. It's nonlinear. But again, that's a topic for a follow-up episode. And finally, directly related, bringing us full circle back to point number 1 about immanence and gnosis, the inner knowledge, gnosis and experiential knowledge, trusting yourself as your own ultimate authority and learning how to listen to, number 1, the goddess self who resides within you. So again, you can read this. It's on the website. I will provide a link in the YouTube video and in the podcast show notes. So that's sort of a deep dive, cursory overview / deep dive of the Goddess Foundation, what I aim to do with it. So again, like I said before, I am not a scholar of religious studies or a feminist theologian. So you might be wondering, who am I to start this organization? I felt that there was a massive gap in terms of access to resources, including information, but also community resources for anyone interested in exploring alternate spiritualities, specifically the goddess spirituality movement. And this all started when my mom died suddenly in October of 2012, now almost 10 years ago. And in the wake of her death, I stumbled upon the goddess in my attempt to come to terms with her loss and to connect with something deeper. I won't say higher because I don't like the hierarchical. I don't like to think of spirituality and the gods as superior to us, poor lowly humans. I think they're actually a deeper facet of our core identity. So I prefer to think of the goddess as my deep self rather than my higher self. Anyway, so over the past 10 years of my exploration of the goddess spirituality movement, I had a lot of trouble finding valuable resources, really high quality resources. The librarian in me felt the need to fill in that gap. So one of the reasons the resources about the goddess and goddess spirituality movement are so difficult to locate is because, I think it's at least in part because the goddess spirituality movement is anti-capitalist, anti-hierarchical, and deliberately decentralized. So because of this, kind of a double-edged sword, it really promotes individual sovereignty and agency. But it also means there is no one central resource which tells you how to work with the goddess, or, oh, look, there are other people interested in the goddess or deeply devoted to the goddess, whether it be a goddess in an ancient pantheon, for instance, Artemis, one of the goddesses with whom I work most closely, or their own inner divinity who may not have a name or a pantheon. So essentially what I'm doing with the Goddess Foundation, in a nutshell, is creating a community resource that I wish I had 10 years ago when I started to explore goddess spirituality and just spirituality writ large in the wake of my mom's death. So a couple upcoming projects. I just wanted to speak to, I think I mentioned it, I did already talk about the theme of the year. That will come into play further down the road, but like I said, finding the goddess hidden in plain sight is the inaugural theme of the Goddess Foundation. And we will start off with a deep dive into Sophia, wisdom incarnate. And I already mentioned this, a book review, book talk series on this book. There are many other books on Sophia. This is just one that I happen to own and that I found deeply, deeply inspiring and illuminating. And then in honor of Mary Magdalene's feast day on July 22nd, I will do a series on Mary Magdalene. And I will also talk about some of my favorite Magdalene fiction, including these two books. This one, The Passion of Mary Magdalene by Elizabeth Cunningham, is actually part of is it a trilogy? No, it's a tetralogy, or whatever the word is for a 4-part series. Phenomenal. And then this is a fascinating Gnostic take on Mary Magdalene, which I will probably start with because it aligns very closely with Sophia and Gnosticism. And if you don't know what that is, we'll get into that later. For now, don't worry about it. Then we will go into the two faces of Sophia, Lilith and Eve, the dark and light faces of her, so to speak. And we will reclaim the Virgin Mary, the unsanitized version of her, and reclaim what it means to be a virgin, whole unto oneself, outside of the patriarchal imposition on women not having sex before marriage. So all that said, we are going to close this inaugural rambly as hell episode, and I will most likely curse a lot. So just a warning. We are going to close this inaugural episode with an oracle card reading from the Divine Feminine Oracle with artwork by Elizabeth Cheever Jessamine by Megan Watterson. And she wrote a phenomenal book about Mary Magdalene, which I will also be talking about closer to Mary Magdalene's feast day. All right, so we're going to pull a card from the deck and see what wisdom from the goddess hidden in plain sight, has for us at this particular point in time. All right. So this goddess is Hestia, also known by the Romans as Vesta, the goddess of sanctuary, and her message is, no matter where I am home. The most sacred sanctuary is found within me. I like that. And I think it encapsulates the core reason that the Goddess Foundation exists, to offer a sanctuary and a home, spiritual home, for anyone and everyone interested in reclaiming the goddess in any way, shape, or form. So we will leave it at that. This is, again, my apologies for the rambliness of this. In the future, episodes will be a tad more structured, but I just felt compelled to, by my own inner God self, my goddess, the hummingbird goddess, which you can learn more about if you want to check out Eudaimonia, my other podcast, where I go into who she is. Anyway, she compelled me to sit down and completely extemporaneously give this brief overview of the Goddess Foundation and what it is and who I am and why I'm doing it, why I created this resource, and how you can become involved. Oh, right. That was the thing I didn't talk about, how you can become involved. So like I did mention the theme of the year. My screen is in the way. Let me move this down. Yes, here it is. So I will, I'm having technical difficulties. Here it is. Okay. So this is a much pamphlet, informational pamphlet about this year's big project, which will likely persist until 2023, perhaps longer, depending on the resources, including financial resources I have. So this is all about how you can engage. How can you contribute to the Goddess Foundation and this inaugural initiative dedicated to reclaiming and finding the goddess hidden in plain sight in the 3 Abrahamic religions? So what you can do is contribute to this oral herstory project by reaching out to me if you want to have an interview with me over Zoom, and I can capture your history, your story that way. Or you can submit a video and or audio recording, 15 to 30 minutes long, of you discussing your relationship to the especially Hebrew and Christian faces of the goddess, but also Islamic faces of the goddess. I must admit I know nothing about that at this point in time. It's a gap in my knowledge, which I am completely open about. But if you engage with and work with the face of the divine feminine from within Islam, you are also more than welcome to contribute. As a frame of reference, I've linked to a video with my close friend and fellow goddess scholar, Dr. Annalisa Dare, in which, Dur, I always mispronounce her last name, in which she discusses her own journey to the goddess on her YouTube channel. And here are some questions that you can think about if you are interested in contributing. 1, what does the goddess mean to me and how did she come into my life? Number 2, how does she speak to me through biblical figures like Mary Magdalene, the Virgin Mary, Lilith, Eve, Sophia, the Shekinah, Tiamat, the biblical Tehom or face of the deep, the Whore of Babylon, or even Babylon of the controversial Thelema, which is a esoteric occult tradition founded by the highly controversial figure Aleister Crowley. And I will have many more resources on all of these different faces of the goddess within this Judeo-Christian umbrella. That's part of the library focus of this year's project, but I also want to hear your stories and your voices of how these faces of the goddess interact with you in your life. So yeah, I will include this in the show notes, and don't hesitate to reach out to me at daimonpodcast, DAIMON podcast, PODCAST @gmail.com. If you have any questions, comments, or want to participate in this oral herstory initiative as part of finding the goddess hidden in plain sight. That's all I have for you currently. Stay tuned for more about the goddess in the Judeo-Christian traditions with a specific focus on Sophia. That will be our first departure on this fascinating topic. So we'll start there. And yeah, stay tuned for more. More content will be coming your way. Again, I apologize for the highly unstructured, impromptu nature of this rambly talk. All future episodes will be more structured, I promise. All right, Goddess be with you. And until next time.